I'm Charlotte McLeod with the Investing News Network, and here today with me is Brian Leni, founder of Junior Stock Review. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So we last spoke about a month and a half ago at the Sprout event in Vancouver. It seems like you've been really busy since then. You've been on a couple of site visits, or maybe more than a couple. Can you tell me where you went and what you learned briefly?
Sure. So I did a trip to Val d'Or in Quebec, which is right in the heart of the Abitibi Greenstone Belt. It's got a ton of history. The part of the belt that I was looking at, the eastern part, has had, I think, historically 70 million ounces mined over the course of history, and really interesting. The first day we went to Osisko Mining, and they've got the Windfall project, which is fairly advanced. They're going to be putting together PFS by the end of the year, actually, I believe. And they've got a full decline down that goes down a vertical 300 meters. And we're able to go down there, see the working face, see what they were doing. And what's really interesting about the Windfall project is, these guys have raised around $400 million over the last four years, and we've been in a downturn. And they put together about 1 million meters of drilling. Yeah. And they're currently going to be drilling a 3.5 kilometer hole, looking at the deepest extents of this possible gold system. And I thought it was extremely interesting, and that could really be a game changer, not only for Windfall, but for that whole Abitibi region, as they prove again that there's exploration upside at depth. On day two, we went to Cartier Resources. They've got their flagship Chimo project. And again, very interesting. These guys are very in tune with how they spend their money. They prioritize. They have 24 zones that they narrowed down to their top 3 priority targets, and they systematically drilled those. And the one issue with what they had, at that point when I was visiting, they did not have 43-101 resource on there, so they couldn't really talk to what they've actually been able to expand that resource to. But since then, they've released news, and they are going to be pushing forward with a technical report, and I think that's going to go a long way to finding a buyer and spiking retail investors' interest in Cartier, and specifically in Chimo, and how it might be sold in the next, let's say, 3 to 6 months. And then on the last day, we went to Radisson Mining, and they were on the other side of Val d'Or, the west side. And they've got the O'Brien project, which again is a past producer like Chimo. And these guys have put together a great model over the last couple of years, looking at the structural. So it's a shear zone deposit, which means it's structurally controlled. They've got both the primary structures and secondary structures included in their model, and they believe that they have identified the areas where the high grade should be. And of course, like most of these Abitibi or past producers, most of the exploration is going to happen at depth, and they're going to be targeting the high grade intersections, and it should be really interesting.
What do you think of that region as a whole? Was it your first time looking at it, or do you know a lot about it already?
It wasn't my first time looking at it.
Yeah.
But really, to gain perspective of these places, you really have to visit it. And you can see the way they've designed the highways. They go, a lot of these guys that follow that Cadillac break, which is one of the main fault systems in the Abitibi. The highway goes basically parallel with it. And so there's great infrastructure. And, for those that don't know, like especially on the Quebec side of things, with the rebates in money towards, the drilling and stuff like that, these guys are at a huge advantage to the rest of the country and maybe even the world. So as far as I'm concerned, it's world class, and it really has directed my attention there right now.
Yeah, and you mentioned just seeing the infrastructure. I feel like going to these places you've mentioned before is really helpful, and sometimes you see just simple things like that. I don't know if you are looking for other more complex things, but I guess it's good to get that big picture.
Absolutely, it is, and it really is the simple things. Like when they say they have a road, and maybe they give you a distance how far they're off the road, but when you actually get to experience it, drive it in a car, see how wide that road is. Could you drive a dump truck or some type of excavator down it? Right. Those are great things for perspective, and you don't see that unless you go there. And even for retail investors that may not be able to get on the site visit, you can still visit Val d'Or, and you can drive that highway, and you can see Malartic, which is the big draw down there. And you can see how these open pits are constructed, and Malartic is the biggest in Canada, biggest gold mine in Canada. And you gain some perspective for that area. And I think it's something that anybody who's really serious about investing in the sector should do.
You mentioned there's some deep drilling going on there, and I think typically people like to see shallower, near surface stuff, but you feel deeper it can work here.
Absolutely. It's always about economics.
Sure.
And, sometimes the narrative flips back and forth. But the interesting, like going back to Windfall, that's going to be a bulk tonnage project. And yeah, so they're going to make it work. Like they've got some high grade hits, or what could be considered high grade hits, but it is quite deep. But, that makes it economic to do a bulk tonnage project there. And that's how you get that equalizing effect. Whereas, the low grade stuff can work as long as it's at surface. So there's always that equalization, and it just basically comes down to economics.
Yeah, so a good tip for investors. You can't just, judge by certain criteria. It's all about the context, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we're here at the Precious Metals Summit. We have to spend some time talking about gold, I think. I know that you're very focused on finding good companies that don't need a whole high gold price to succeed. But how have you seen the current price affecting gold stocks?
Well, to be honest, I guess I'm focused in on probably, my watch list has about 300 companies on it. And for the most part, they're all junior resource companies. And what I would say is that most of those companies really haven't seen the uptick anyways. So even though we've seen some fluctuation in the gold price, I would argue that, it's kind of the same thing we've seen for the last, 8 months. There is some specific stories, but I think that their spikes have been more related to news rather than necessarily the overarching high gold price theme.
Do you think that's coming? A lot of people have been telling me, there's been increases for majors and mid-tiers. Is it coming for the juniors? Should we be looking for that?
Yeah, I resist on saying like when it's going to happen.
maybe not when, but will it happen?
Yeah, so there's I would say there's a big difference between imminent and inevitable.
Sure.
And I would say this is one of those inevitable things that's going to happen. It has to happen. It's just when. And I think you remain picky in what you want to invest in, and then you'll be set up for whenever that market does change, and then the juniors become the focus, whether that's like a big spike in M&A or whether the gold price does bring the generalist investor back into the junior resource sector. You'll be ready, and you'll be in the best companies, and they're going to move first.
How's the sentiment at this conference feeling to you? You've been speaking to probably a lot of juniors that are here.
Optimistic.
Optimistic.
Yeah, there's definitely a change. Then I did the Precious Metal Summit meetings at PDAC.
Yeah.
And but half the companies that I met there didn't have any money, and they were looking to raise, and they were having problems raising. Fast forward now, I guess it's 6 months later, and I would say there's only one company that was looking for money, and they had just started, and everybody else was cashed up and ready to rock. So I do think that there is maybe at some level definitely a change in where that money's maybe coming from. Eric Sprott's been a big part of that.
Yeah.
So, but I would say most of the companies that I've met here are in good positions to move their companies forward, and that's great.
Yeah, that's one of the themes that's been coming up for me is where is that money coming from? Obviously, Eric Sprott's name comes up a lot, but where's your sense that it's coming from?
I think smart investors. I think smart money is taking positions, and they're sticking to the cream of the crop. And I think that's still who's getting the money first and the largest amount. And that's the way these markets work. The best stuff goes first, and then if we truly are in a bull market, then you will see a tide that rises all boats. At least historically, that's what has happened.
This time last year, the big theme was mergers and acquisitions, and we've seen that continue a little bit into 2019. Is that still a theme that you're seeing? Or are you seeing any other big things going on in gold?
Absolutely. There's lots of talk of it. Hasn't necessarily seen anything happen yet. I don't know what would be the catalyst for it either. But yeah, there's lots of talk of it. There's lots of rumor, especially around this conference, like last night, conversations about M&A. And I think it's another one of those things that's inevitable. But what necessarily becomes the spur, maybe it just takes one deal, and then all the other ones will start to come together. But yeah, it's definitely being talked about.
So you would see it coming down from the big companies and then through the space?
Most likely. But a good example is maybe O3 Mining in the Abitibi where we were. O3 Mining has bought Chalice Gold. They bought Alexandria. And there was one other purchase, I forget the name, but that's one of those companies that's like a brand new company, and they're looking to consolidate these regions that they feel are high potential, and the Abitibi being a big one.
Okay, I think last question. What's your sense right now? This is very broad. What's your sense of where we're at in the current resource cycle, commodity cycle? We always hear that the market is cyclical.
I would agree with. I've heard some other people talk about. We're in those initial stages, and people always look to their immediate past and project that out into the future. And I think smart money has come into the sector right now, and they're the ones that are pushing this initial move. And I think it's just a matter of time before we start to move into the place where the juniors really start to move. So.
Okay, that's all for me. Unless you have any final words that you want to leave investors with.
No, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. Once again, I'm Charlotte McLeod with the Investing News Network, and this is Brian Leni with Junior Stock Review.